When a little boy is spotted in the midst of a normally serene town square, trembling so hard that his toy car nearly slips from his fingers, most passers-by think he's just lost. But when a single glance from him hints at a far darker situation, it sets Detective Johnson on a race against the clock to save a child from unimaginable danger. Before we begin this harrowing story of hidden motives and unspoken truths, tell us where you're watching from, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Detective Samuel Johnson leaned against the driver's seat of his sedan, tapping a finger on the steering wheel. The sun's early rays colored the small town square with a warm glow that typically highlighted the peacefulness of this community. Already, he could see the day's slow bustle beginning, an elderly couple buying pastries from a street cart, a group of teens on bicycles laughing loudly by the fountain, and a friendly mail carrier pushing a cart of letters down the cobblestone path. Yet something felt off. Johnson chalked it up to an old pang in his gut, one he'd learned never to ignore. After years in law enforcement, some in big cities, others in calmer precincts, he'd developed an uncanny sense for trouble. Today, he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. Maybe it was just a memory of the last conversation he'd had with his teenage daughter, who was angry at him for missing another one of her drama club events. That guilt had latched onto him all morning. He forced the thought aside, but it lingered at the edges of his mind like a nagging conscience. He'd stepped out of official uniform years ago, preferring plainclothes detective work for the flexibility to investigate without standing out too much. But even in jeans and a jacket, Johnson looked every bit the cop, tall, broad-shouldered, and steady-eyed. Townspeople generally recognized him, but they gave him space. They knew he was approachable, sure, yet he carried himself with a seriousness that kept people from idle small talk unless they had a reason. His phone buzzed on the seat next to him. He glanced down to see the name Mikey flash across the screen. Mikey was his longtime friend and fellow detective at the precinct, a shorter, more jovial man who'd grown up in this very town. Where Johnson carried a certain gravitas, Mikey balanced it out with easy smiles and comforting humor. Yet Mikey was also haunted by a mistake from a previous case a few years back, when a child kidnapping ended in tragedy before he and Johnson could solve it. That sense of guilt had shaped Mikey's relentless determination to protect every vulnerable kid he encountered. Johnson answered the call. "You're up early, Mikey." Mikey's voice crackled with subdued urgency. "Sam, I'm over by the fountain, grabbing coffee. You might want to get out here. There's a kid who looks absolutely terrified. He's alone, holding some kind of toy, and he keeps asking people for help but clams up before finishing a sentence." Something's not right? Johnson's heart kicked up a beat. He shoved open the door of his sedan. "Where exactly?" "North side of the square, near that statue of the Civil War soldier," Mikey said quickly. "Hurry." "I'm on it," Johnson replied. He hung up, scanning across the quaint, tree-lined square. Sure enough, near a stone bench partially shaded by an old oak, he spotted a young boy who seemed about 8 or 9. The boy wore scuffed sneakers and an oversized green hoodie. In his hands, he clutched a small toy car, chipped paint revealing that it was well-loved. Johnson walked across the square, weaving through clusters of people. He could see the boy's posture was tense, shoulders hunched, knees turned inward. A few concerned onlookers hovered nearby, but no one approached him directly, perhaps because the boy kept shaking his head whenever they tried to speak. Mikey caught Johnson's eye and gave a quick tilt of his chin. Johnson approached the boy slowly. "Hey, buddy," he said in a gentle tone. "Are you okay? Where's your family?" The boy's hands trembled around the toy car, and he looked up at Johnson with watery eyes. "I can't find my mom," he whispered. "I was with her just a minute ago and then—" Before the boy could continue, a woman appeared, briskly pushing past Johnson. She had disheveled hair, a tense face, and a voice that quavered as she spoke. "Tom, you scared me. Why'd you run off like that?" She grabbed his arm, perhaps more forcefully than necessary. "Let's go." Johnson's brow furrowed. Something in the child's expression changed from fear to abject terror. "Wait," Johnson said, raising a hand. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" The boy seemed. She shot him a sharp glare, voice hitching. "We're fine," she insisted, half dragging the boy. "He's my nephew." He just got lost, that's all. Tom bit his lip, letting out a small whimper. I want my mom. A flicker of anguish crossed the woman's face, but she tightened her grip on Tom. Hush, she muttered. Then she tugged him away from the bench, glancing nervously at Johnson and Mikey. In that split second, Johnson read the boy's eyes. A silent plea for help. That was all he needed to confirm something was horribly wrong. Johnson stepped forward. Ma'am, you mind waiting just a minute? We can help. But she was already rushing off, weaving through the crowd. Johnson and Mikey exchanged looks, adrenaline surging. She said nephew, but that boy definitely said, I want my mom, not I want my aunt, Mikey muttered. Exactly, Johnson replied, face grim. We follow. They moved quickly, trying not to alarm the rest of the square. The woman led Tom across the street into a smaller block of shops. She glanced back, saw them tailing her, and practically yanked Tom's arm, breaking into a half-run. Johnson cursed under his breath, lengthening his strides. He'd resolved not to lose them. Not again. Memories of a previous kidnapping case where they were just minutes too late flickered across his mind. That child had never returned home. He wouldn't let that happen to Tom. The woman, dragging the boy behind her, disappeared around a corner. By the time Johnson and Mikey got there, they found a single empty alley. A battered sedan peeled out of a side parking lot at the far end, screeching onto the main road. Damn it, Mikey growled. No plates? Johnson shook his head, scanning in vain for a license number. Couldn't see. Let's get a description out. Gray sedan, missing a hubcap, heavy damage on the rear left door, tinted windows. The woman, brown hair, mid-30s, wore a navy jacket, trembling voice. Mikey nodded, already on his phone, calling it into dispatch. Johnson placed his hands on his hips, scanning the alley. A small piece of green fabric lay on the ground, torn from the boy's hoodie. He picked it up gently, anger and worry swirling in his gut. This is bad, he muttered. Kidnapping in broad daylight? The swirl of guilt gnawed at him. If only he'd arrived a minute earlier, or pressed her more firmly. But second-guessing was pointless. He needed to act. He looked at Mikey. We need a name. If the boy's missing, there's got to be a report. Mikey was already dialing the precinct. We'll check with local stations, see if a missing child alert was put in. By the time they returned to the square, word had spread. Several onlookers had glimpsed the frantic woman and the terrified boy. One older man said, she was whispering something about saving him from a bad life. I couldn't really make it out. She was so nervous. A middle-aged woman who ran the pastry cart chimed in. I heard her say ching maybe. Like she was talking to herself. Nathan, stay calm, keep him safe. Weird if you ask me. Johnson thanked them, crossing over to the patrol car that had just arrived. The uniformed officer rolled down the window. We'll start canvassing the area, the officer said. Any idea who the woman is? Possibly named Nadine, Johnson answered. We have reason to believe the boy's name is Tom. He felt a pang in his chest, noticing the toy car wasn't in the alley. Tom must have dropped it or left it behind. He pictured that battered toy, evidence that the child was forcibly uprooted from whatever normal life he had. Mikey hung up his call. Got something. We have an urgent missing child report from earlier this morning. Tom Stone, 8 years old, reported missing by his mother, Sarah Stone. She told dispatch she'd last seen him near her parents' house, which is just a few blocks from the square. He was wearing a green hoodie, black sneakers, holding a toy car. That's definitely him, Sam. Johnson's gut twisted. Then we're dealing with a full-blown abduction. He thought of the mother, probably frantic, calling the station over and over. We need to speak to Sarah Stone. Already arranged, Mikey replied. She's on her way to the precinct now. They wasted no time heading to the station. The building was modest, a low-slung brick structure with half a dozen offices and a handful of holding cells. Inside, everything was abuzz, an unusual scramble of activity for a town that usually saw petty theft or neighborly disputes. Johnson guided Mikey into a side conference room to regroup while they waited for Sarah Stone. His phone rang again. Dispatch had a partial witness from the main road. Someone spotted a gray sedan speeding north. Possibly the same car. Johnson relayed the news to the officers on duty, requesting they check traffic cameras, though few of the local streets had them. The worry gnawed at him. In these smaller towns, technology was limited. If Nadine took Tom onto the highway, she could disappear unless they got more leads. Sarah Stone arrived. Johnson met her at the front desk. She was in her early 30s, hair disheveled, eyes swollen from crying. "Detective Johnson?" she asked, voice trembling. "I'm Sarah Stone. They told me you know something about Tom." Johnson nodded. "Let's talk in private." He led her to the conference room, where Mikey waited. She sat down, clutching her purse on her lap, knuckles white. Johnson spoke gently. "We believe we saw Tom earlier today in the town square with a woman matching the description you gave." Sarah let out a shaky breath, tears brimming. "He went out to play in my parents' yard this morning. I ran inside to get him a snack, and when I came out he was gone. Mom and Dad helped me look all over the neighborhood, then I called the police." Mikey asked softly, "Does the name Nadine mean anything to you?" Sarah shook her head vigorously. "Oh, I don't know any Nadine. Tom never mentioned a Nadine." Johnson glanced at Mikey, who nodded that they'd heard enough to confirm the child had no known association with this woman. "We're doing everything we can," Johnson said to Sarah. "We have officers checking the roads, looking for a gray sedan. Do you have any idea why Tom might have been targeted? Has anyone threatened you or your family?" She looked stunned, eyes darting around. "Threatened me? I mean, Tom's father, my ex-husband, is behind on child support, but he wouldn't do this. He lives 4 states away," and she broke off, burying her face in her hands. "Oh God, I can't think. I just want my boy back." Johnson rubbed the tension from his forehead, a dull ache forming behind his eyes. "We'll find him," he promised. "Any detail might help. Has Tom mentioned anything strange? Any new acquaintances?" She swallowed, blinking away tears. "Oh, he's a quiet boy, loves toy cars and drawing. We moved back here a few months ago. He's adjusting to a new school. I can't imagine who would do this." Mikey interjected gently, "We'll set up a system of calls, so you're updated every step of the way. If you recall anything even minor, let us know." Sarah left the station a short while later, accompanied by an officer who would drive her home. Johnson's chest felt heavy, thoughts whirling. He was replaying the fleeting image of Tom's terrified eyes in the square. Coupled with that, a flicker of anxiety about his own teenage daughter, Christina, who had texted him that morning, "You're never around, Dad." He typed out an apologetic response but never hit send, called away by Mikey's phone call. Something about letting a child down, any child, stirred up feelings of failure in him, and it drove him to be relentless in protecting kids like Tom. Mikey snapped him out of his reverie. Sam, one of the officers, found a partial security camera feed from the gas station up the street. "Looks like a gray sedan, possibly matching the one we're after, fueled up there maybe 15 minutes after the abduction. The driver was described as a woman with brown hair, mid-30s, but she wore sunglasses. The clerk said he overheard her muttering about its safe house she needed to reach." Johnson's mind jumped. "Safe house," he repeated. "Could be some delusional belief that she's rescuing Tom from an unfit environment. We've seen that profile." Mikey's jaw set. "I still have nightmares about that one case in Clifton where a woman rescued a neighbor's kid from dangerous parents. The child ended up locked in a basement for a week. I won't let it happen again." Johnson placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, feeling the tension thrumming beneath. "We'll do whatever it takes." They spent hours combing through possible leads. The name Nadine Rowan surfaced in an old database entry. 2 years prior, a woman by that name had been questioned for harassing a family in a neighboring county, claiming their child was hers. No formal charges. She vanished. The address on record was useless, an abandoned property near an industrial park. They called that county's records office, eventually learning Nadine had lost custody of her own daughter 5 years ago. The court documents hinted at mental instability and paranoia. That, combined with her prior behavior, suggested she might be repeating a pattern of abducting or attempting to abduct children she believed needed saving. As night fell, the station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and Johnson felt a familiar weight behind his eyes. He and Mikey planned out a search radius, focusing on quiet roads or deserted spots where Nadine could hide. Then came a call from dispatch. A local farmer spotted a gray sedan speeding toward a cluster of old cottages by the river, a place seldom visited by tourists. Johnson nodded at Mikey. "Let's go." They hopped into Johnson's sedan, adrenaline rising. Mikey's phone pinged repeatedly with updates from other units. "We have 2 squad cars heading that way, but no sign of her yet," Mikey relayed. "If she's truly delusional, she might keep Tom hidden. Or if she thinks she's cornered." Johnson exhaled sharply. "We can't let that happen. Let's see if we can reason with her before she panics." In the back of his mind, images of the last time they'd cornered a mentally unstable abductor flickered. The standoff ended with tragedy. He clenched the wheel, determined not to repeat that. The roads turned rough and narrow as they neared the river. Dense trees on either side cast shifting shadows across the headlights. Finally, they spotted faint taillights ahead. Johnson killed his headlights, coasting along as quietly as possible. The taillights turned down a gravel path that led to one of the dilapidated cottages. Johnson parked behind a thick copse of bushes. He and Mikey exited, guns holstered but hands tense. Farther up the path, the gray sedan was indeed parked, rear door left ajar. "She's in there," Mikey whispered. They crept closer, straining to hear. Through a broken window, they heard muffled voices, Nadine's frantic tone, a child's stifled sob. Johnson peered in. By the faint moonlight, he glimpsed Nadine kneeling beside Tom, who sat on a moldy old couch, arms wrapped around himself. "Stop crying," Nadine murmured, though her own voice shook. "I told you, your mother doesn't deserve you. I'm saving you from a life of pain. Trust me." Tom whimpered, "I want to go home." Nadine's face twisted in anguish. "You don't mean that. You're just afraid. She'll never love you like I do." She stroked his hair, an almost maternal gesture, but the entire scene reeked of desperation and fear. Johnson's heart hammered. He motioned for Mikey to circle around the back, while Johnson approached the front door. Quietly, he eased the rotted wooden door open with a gentle nudge. But the old hinges creaked, and Nadine's head whipped around. "Who's there?" she snapped, voice laced with panic. She sprang up, yanking Tom behind her. "Stay back." Johnson lifted his hands in front of him, palms out in a universal sign of peace. "Nadine, is that your name?" "It's Detective Johnson. I just want to talk." She pressed her back against the couch, eyes darting. "No more talking. You want to take him? You won't believe me when I say he's in danger with his mother." Johnson kept his voice steady, though tension thrummed through his body. "We can discuss that. But you can't force Tom to stay here. If you're worried about him, we can handle it legally, with Child Protective Services. Right now, this is kidnapping, Nadine." She shook her head wildly. No. I lost my own daughter that way. Courts, the system. They took her from me and ruined her life. Tom is safe if I hide him. I won't lose another child." Tom's tear-streaked face peeked out from behind her, and he let out a soft, "Detective, please." Johnson's eyes met Tom's, and an intense protectiveness flooded him. "I'm here," he said, voice tight with empathy. "Nadine, you don't want to hurt him, right?" She swallowed, tears glistening. "Hurt him? I want to save him. You're the ones who'd let him be harmed. His father's a gambler, you know. I found out. I saw him in the papers, debts piling up. That's why I knew Tom needed me." Johnson's brow furrowed. "That was new information. Where did you hear that?" Nadine let out a mirthless laugh. "Newspaper articles, rumor. The father's name is Martin Stone, yes? He's drowning in debt. Once they can't pay, the child suffers. No money for anything. Tom will be neglected, maybe abused. That's what happened to me, to my little girl. I had no support, got behind on bills, they took her away. So I'm saving him first." Johnson felt a jolt. This was a twist he hadn't seen coming. Tom's parents were divorced, and Sarah never mentioned huge debts. Could it be that the father's financial issues were a bigger problem than the mother let on? Still, it didn't justify abduction. Even if that's true, Tom's living with his mother, not his father. He's in a stable home with grandparents around. Nadine shook her head. You're lying. That's not stable. She's only a caretaker. I'm the real protector now. Don't come any closer or I'll... She grabbed a half-broken lamp from the side table, brandishing it as a weapon. Johnson tensed. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mikey creeping in from behind, carefully. But Nadine was cornered, dangerously unstable. One wrong move could traumatize Tom further or lead to violence. Johnson swallowed, trying a softer tactic. Nadine, he said gently, we didn't know about your daughter. I'm sorry for what you've been through. It sounds like the system failed you. But hurting Tom or keeping him here against his will won't fix that pain. She clutched the lamp tighter. You don't understand. Nobody does. Tears streaked down her cheeks. When I needed help, I got none. When I asked for a chance, they shut the door. Now I see a boy headed for the same fate. I'm just intervening. The cycle ends here. Tom let out a sniffle that turned into a shuddering sob. I just want my mom. Please. Nadine's face twitched, revealing a brief flicker of heartbreak. Johnson seized that moment of hesitation to step closer. We can talk about solutions. But you have to let Tom go. Suddenly, the floor creaked behind them, and one of the rotting boards gave out under Mikey's foot. He stumbled, letting out a yelp as he tried to keep from crashing to the ground. Nadine whirled, startled. In her panic, she raised the broken lamp, as if to throw it at Mikey. Johnson lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. She shrieked, fighting his grip, tears flying as she twisted. The lamp clattered to the floor. Mikey scrambled upright, positioning himself to block Nadine if she tried to flee. Tom darted aside, arms shielding his head. Stop, he cried. Nadine continued to struggle, but Johnson's strength pinned her. She looked from him to Mikey in terror. You're not listening, she gasped. He's in real danger. His father's issues, the mother's neglect, this whole system. Mikey freed Tom's path. Tom, come here, he said, voice steady but urgent. Tom sprinted to Mikey, who placed a protective arm around him. Johnson used his free hand to fish out his cuffs. Nadine, he breathed. It's over. She let out one final cry of anguish before sagging in his grip, sobbing uncontrollably. He handcuffed her gently. We'll get you help, he said, a pang of sympathy cutting through his frustration. With Tom safe in Mikey's care, Johnson pulled out his phone to call for backup. Soon, paramedics arrived to check on Tom. The boy clung to Mikey's arm as though letting go would plunge him back into the nightmare. Police lights bounced off the water outside, illuminating the cracked walls with an eerie red-blue glow. Nadine, eyes swollen from tears, was escorted to a squad car. She looked back at Tom, mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. Outside, the night air felt thick, as if the tension of the rescue still lingered. Rain threatened in the dark clouds overhead. Johnson called Sarah Stone, relief flooding his voice as he told her Tom was safe. Her sob of gratitude over the phone was accompanied by furious questions about Nadine. Johnson promised to explain everything once they were at the station. He also recalled Nadine's claims about Tom's father, Martin Stone, being in major debt. Johnson made a mental note to see if that was credible. It might not justify Nadine's actions, but it could reveal deeper issues in Tom's family life. Maybe the mother hadn't been entirely forthcoming. They returned to the station. Officers booked Nadine on charges of kidnapping and child endangerment. She was still in a fragile mental state, muttering half-coherent explanations about saving children. Meanwhile, Tom reunited with his mother in a swirl of tears. Johnson stood by, quietly letting them have their moment. Then, Sarah approached him, hugging Tom tight. "Thank you," she managed, voice quivering. "Oh God, thank you so much." Johnson nodded. "He's safe, that's all that matters. We'll need a statement, but take your time." Tom was trembling with the shock of everything. A paramedic offered him a blanket, and he buried his face in it, tears still leaking down his cheeks. Johnson's mind wouldn't let him rest. He kept recalling Nadine's claims about Martin Stone's debts. That might be a detail Sarah withheld to maintain the family's image or simply because she thought it unimportant. But if it was relevant enough to fuel Nadine's paranoia, it might have shaped the abduction in ways Sarah didn't realize. Later, after Tom had been medically cleared and was resting in a quiet office, Johnson sat down with Sarah. Her parents hovered close by, anxious. "Sarah, Nadine mentioned something about Tom's father having serious financial issues. That she believed Tom was at risk. Do you know what she meant?" Sarah's eyes flickered with discomfort. "Martin has a gambling problem," she admitted softly. "He racked up debts over the past few years. He's behind on child support. But he doesn't have custody, so I didn't think. I mean, how would that matter? Tom lives with me." Johnson studied her expression. "Do you think Tom might have told someone at school or around town about his dad's situation? Possibly leading to rumors that you're struggling too?" She looked away, a flush creeping over her cheeks. "We do struggle financially. My folks help with rent. I do odd jobs. But Tom's never complained. He's a sweet kid, rarely says anything negative about his dad, even though Martin's practically absent. Maybe he told a friend, or maybe Nadine just found old articles about Martin's arrests for illegal gambling. Those might still be online." Johnson exhaled. Nadine claimed she saw a story or rumor, jumped to the conclusion that Tom needed saving. "She's been mentally unstable, especially after losing her own child. She latched onto your boy as a replacement." Sarah's voice shook. "That's horrifying. And all because Martin's issues got publicized? I mean, Tom's father might not be perfect, but we manage. We love Tom. He's never in real danger at home." Her eyes welled up again. "I would never let anything happen to him." "I believe you," Johnson said. "Try not to blame yourself." Nadine's decisions were her own, fueled by her delusions. "We'll make sure she can't hurt Tom or anyone else again." Sarah sniffled, nodding. "Thank you, Detective." Meanwhile, Mikey was conferring with one of the newer officers, giving details about how to handle Nadine's mental health evaluation. Johnson joined them in time to hear Mikey say, "We can't treat her like a typical criminal. She's clearly in crisis." The younger officer nodded, scribbling notes. Johnson murmured, "We'll do the usual procedures. The courts will decide if she's fit to stand trial or if she needs psychiatric placement." He rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion weighing on him. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, noting a missed call from his daughter. Guilt flared, but he shoved it aside. He'd deal with that soon. Right now, Tom's safety was the priority. Over the next few days, the story spread through town. People voiced relief that Tom was rescued, but also shocked that a kidnapping could happen in their quiet square. Rumors swirled about Nadine's mental state, her tragic past, and her allegations about the father's debts. Sarah tried to shield Tom from the gossip, taking him to therapy sessions recommended by the precinct. Johnson checked in daily, ensuring Tom was adjusting. He discovered that Tom was having nightmares, waking up sobbing about being locked in that musty cottage. The sight of a gray car could send him into fits of anxiety. Johnson also discovered another side effect of the fiasco. Sarah's father, Bob Henderson, confronted her ex-husband Martin in a heated phone call, accusing him of endangering Tom by letting his gambling problems become public knowledge. Martin retorted that Sarah had run off with Tom, refusing to let him see the boy regularly. Threats were exchanged. This family tension, while overshadowed by the kidnapping, suggested that Tom's home life was more complicated than Johnson had initially realized. It made the detective reflect on Nadine's viewpoint. Twisted though it was, she had perceived a struggling family dynamic, albeit one that didn't justify abduction. Johnson felt uneasy, as if the Stone family had cracks that might widen if not addressed. It wasn't his job to fix personal relationships, but he made sure Tom's assigned counselor was aware that family stress could exacerbate the boy's trauma. Meanwhile, Mikey wrestled with his own demons. One evening, after a long shift, Johnson found him in the break room, staring at an old photograph pinned to the bulletin board. A group shot of the precinct from 3 years ago, featuring a grinning child they once tried to save but arrived too late. Mikey's eyes glistened. "Hey, buddy," Johnson said softly, "why torture yourself?" Mikey exhaled. "Because that last kidnapping ended in tragedy, and every time we get a call about a child in danger, I can't stop remembering. This time, we saved Tom. But the minute I saw that boy in the square, I felt all the old panic surge up." Johnson patted his shoulder. You did good, Mikey. We got Tom back. No tragedies this time. Mikey nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah. Thanks to you stepping up when I almost lost my footing in that cottage. I was so scared I'd spook Nadine and cause another fiasco. Johnson squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. We did it together. Don't forget that. The conversation cemented their bond further. They'd each been shaped by regrets, but also by a resolve to do better next time. This time, Tom was safe. Eventually, Nadine faced her court hearing, which determined whether she'd stand trial or be placed in psychiatric care. Johnson and Mikey attended, prepared to testify about the abduction. Nadine's public defender argued that she was deeply unstable, referencing the tragic loss of her daughter and the paranoid delusions she'd demonstrated for years. Nadine herself looked hollow, eyes distant, hardly recognizing Johnson when she was led into the courtroom in a drab jumpsuit. She mumbled about Tom's father's gambling, insisting she was right. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation. Johnson couldn't help feeling a pang of sympathy. He imagined how heartbreak and mental illness might warp someone's sense of right and wrong. Still, that didn't excuse putting Tom through terror. As they left the courthouse, journalists snapped photos, peppering the detectives with questions. Johnson said little, giving a measured statement about how the boy's safety had been their top priority and the justice system would handle Nadine's case. Outside, Sarah and Tom waited near the steps, accompanied by Bob Henderson. The older man seemed on edge, glaring at the courthouse doors. Tom clung to Sarah's hand, peeking shyly at Johnson. Hi, Tom said in a small voice. Thank you for coming. Johnson smiled gently. Of course. How are you feeling? Tom shrugged, fiddling with the sleeve of his hoodie. Better. Mom says we might move again, somewhere new. Dad's angry about it, but I don't want to see him. He's always yelling about money. Sarah cleared her throat. We're figuring things out. I might move closer to my sister in the next county, get a fresh start. Tom's father. He and I have some issues to resolve. Bob, the grandfather, frowned. If that man had paid his debts or kept his business private, none of this might have happened. He glanced at Tom, tone hushed. We'll keep the boy safe, no matter what. Johnson sensed a wave of tension. Nadine's kidnapping had exposed a deeper family rift. He wanted to offer some paternal advice but knew it wasn't his place. Instead, he knelt and met Tom's gaze. Remember, if you ever feel unsafe, tell someone you trust right away. You're a strong kid. Tom nodded, mouth curving into the faintest smile. I will. Then he lifted the battered toy car from his pocket. The paint was chipped, but it was still his treasured possession. I keep this with me so I remember I'm okay now, he said softly. Johnson's heart tightened. That's good, he said. And you are okay. You'll keep getting better. The family left, and Johnson stood on the courthouse steps, exhaling a long breath. Mikey wandered up beside him. Looks like Tom's folks have issues to work through. But at least he's not in immediate danger anymore. Johnson nodded. Yeah. Could have ended much worse. That evening, Johnson finally found a quiet moment to call his daughter, Christina. She picked up on the third ring. Dad, she said, voice edged with leftover annoyance. What's up? You never answered my text. He closed his eyes, imagining her in the house they used to share before he and her mother divorced. I'm sorry, Chris. I got pulled into a kidnapping case. A little boy was taken. We managed to save him, but it's been intense. She was silent for a beat, then said, I guess that's good. Did you solve everything? Mostly, Johnson admitted, a note of weariness in his tone. But it made me think of you. I don't want you to feel like I'm neglecting you. Work's just, you know how it is. Christina sighed. I get it, but it's hard when you miss every performance. I wanted you to see me in the drama club's big show. He rubbed his forehead. Next one, I promise I'll be there. I'll even help with the sets if you want. I'm not missing anything important anymore. She gave a quiet, tentative laugh. All right, deal. When he hung up, he felt a swirl of guilt and relief. Even though he'd saved one child, he realized how vital it was not to fail his own. That personal vow settled in him, pushing him to reorganize his priorities. The next time Christina had a performance, he'd be in the front row. He couldn't save every kid in the world if he failed to show up for his own daughter. In the following weeks, Tom's story gradually slipped from the public forefront. Life in the small town resumed its gentle pace. Morning coffees at the bakery, families strolling in the square, farmers selling produce at weekend markets. Yet the rescue left a subtle imprint. Parents watched their children more closely. An undercurrent of caution replaced the once lax attitude. Johnson, for his part, used that shift to encourage the community to be more vigilant. He also discreetly checked on Sarah and Tom, learning that they were indeed planning to move in with her sister. The grandparents didn't love the idea, but they respected Sarah's wish for a fresh environment to help Tom move forward. Nadine's psychiatric evaluation concluded she was not fully competent to stand trial. She was remanded to a secure facility for long-term treatment. The judge's decision sparked debate among townsfolk. Some felt she should be locked up in prison, others thought mental health support was more appropriate. Johnson, reading the psychological reports, understood the complexity. She'd been traumatized by losing her daughter and had developed a desperate savior complex. The facility would be her best chance to get help, though it meant indefinite detention until doctors deemed her stable. One evening, Johnson and Mikey found themselves patrolling a local charity event, a fundraiser to support the local children's center. They watched from the sidelines as kids played ring toss and face-painting booths dotted the park. Johnson spotted Tom among them, to his surprise. The boy was with his mother and an older woman who looked similar to Sarah, her sister, presumably. Tom hesitated for a moment, then, as if gathering courage, walked over to Johnson. "Hi, Detective," Tom said quietly. He held his toy car in one hand and a cotton candy stick in the other. Johnson crouched. "Tom, didn't expect to see you here. How are you doing?" Tom's eyes flicked around, a bit shy in the crowd. "But we're moving soon. Aunt Becky is real nice. Mom said we'll live near her. I'm still scared sometimes. But I'm trying to be brave." Mikey joined them, offering a warm grin. "You look like you're doing a good job at that, buddy." Tom managed a small smile. "You both saved me. I won't forget it." Johnson felt a tightness in his chest. "We did what anyone would do," he said gently. "You're a strong kid, Tom. You'll get through this." Tom nodded, chewing his lip, then he held out the toy car. I want you to keep this. I have others. But this is the one I had with me when, I think maybe you should have it." Johnson blinked, taken aback. He glanced at Mikey, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Tom," he said softly, "are you sure? That's your special car." Tom pressed it into Johnson's hand. "I'm sure. Thank you for finding me." Johnson felt a lump form in his throat. He closed his fingers around the chipped toy, overcome by a wave of emotion he rarely showed in public. "Thank you," he managed, voice thick. "I'll keep it safe. Promise." Tom gave a timid wave, then rushed back to his mother. Johnson stood slowly, the toy car in his grasp a symbol of the boy's survival and trust. Mikey patted his shoulder. "That's quite a gift," Mikey said quietly. Johnson's eyes glistened. "Yeah, it is." In the days that followed, Johnson placed the toy car on his desk at the station, a reminder of the vow he'd made to protect children, to be vigilant, and also to show up for his own daughter. Christina eventually told him her next drama performance date, and he took the day off in advance, determined to be there. He even surprised her by dropping by a rehearsal. The smile on her face was worth every ounce of rearranged scheduling. Meanwhile, the Stone family moved away. Sarah kept in touch with the precinct long enough to finalize any outstanding questions about Nadine's case. She promised to let them know if Tom needed further help. Johnson felt a wave of relief, knowing the boy might finally find peace in a new environment, away from the town's hushed whispers. But the echoes of the kidnapping lingered in subtle ways. The local government allocated a bit more funding for mental health outreach after the public learned about Nadine's condition. It was small progress, but progress nonetheless. Johnson saw some satisfaction in that, hoping that earlier intervention could prevent the next tragedy. One afternoon, as he and Mikey walked through the now familiar square, they noticed the fountain gleaming in the midday sun, families chatting on benches. The usual calm had returned, but Johnson's gaze caught every passing child. He wouldn't let complacency creep in. He knew too well how illusions of safety could be shattered in an instant. Mikey, too, seemed more at ease, lighter since the successful rescue. Perhaps both men found a measure of closure, having saved Tom where they'd once failed another child. Their conversation drifted to inconsequential topics: where to grab lunch, how the local high school baseball team was doing, but then Mikey paused, turning to Johnson with a reflective look. "Hey, about that old guilt I've been carrying, maybe it's time I let it go. We did right by Tom. That's gotta count for something." Johnson nodded. "It does. We can't undo the past, but we can make sure we learn from it." They strolled on, the sound of children's laughter blending with the gentle splash of the fountain. Johnson glanced at the toy car in the inner pocket of his jacket, where he'd begun keeping it as a lucky charm. He felt grateful that Tom was safe, that Nadine was getting help, and that he still had the chance to be a better father to Christina. In the end, the story carried sorrow and relief in equal measure. Nadine faced the consequences of her actions while possibly receiving treatment for her deep wounds. Tom would bear scars of fear but also found strength in the unwavering love of his family, forging a new life away from old turmoil. And Johnson? He emerged with a clearer sense of his mission, determined to guard children not just from external threats, but from the silent fractures that families sometimes hid until too late. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.